All right. Happy Thursday. It's a bit of an adjustment. It's Thursday, not Friday, like it usually is. But we are back with another episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and getting the questions answered you need answered for a lot of different reasons. But anyway, today's topic at hand is the topic of we're going to be talking about hybrid workplace. We're going to be talking about hybrid learning, hybrid design, what we need to do to be successful in this space. So it's going to be a really fun conversation. And I'm joined by grizzled Learning Tech Talks veteran Sam Herring. He has been here before, so this is not new to him. But he is from Intrepid by VitalSource. And we're going to be talking this through. We'll talk a little bit about what Intrepid is as we get into it. But before we do, we got to have a little bit of fun. And I'm trying a new streaming studio today, so we're gonna shake things up. It's gonna be a little bit different, a little bit interesting. But if you can, comment in and tell us where you're joining from. And let's start with you, Sam. So where are you today in the world? And I know it's somewhere on the West Coast.
That is. Drum roll. Yes, I am beaming in from Seattle, Washington today. Capitol Hill neighborhood, to be specific. Yep.
Okay, Capitol Hill. Wait. Okay, got it. All right. So I'm in Waukesha as usual, so that hasn't changed for me. Same as normal there. But then let's do this. Let's also do our icebreaker activity. And you've had a little bit of time. You didn't even have to think. You didn't even have to think about your answer to this, which surprised me because it took a little bit of time for me to come to mind. And I have the advantage of planning ahead. You didn't have that. So you can also play along if you're watching. You can come in your answers as well. But Sam, let's hear it from you. If you could compete in any summer Olympic sport, what would it be and why?
Crew. I was a rower in college.
Just like boom, you just like went there. Just boom, crew. Didn't even think that literally backstage. Anybody is exactly how quickly he knew his answer. So that was not scripted. So crew, you were a rower in college.
I was a rower in college, and it's an incredible experience. I actually had a couple guys one guy on our boat did double sculls in the Olympic qualifiers. He was an unbelievable athlete. So I knew some guys who went all the way, and it's a pretty incredible experience.
Okay. All right. So how many, like, did you grow up rowing too, or was it just in college? Did you just pick it up then?
Yeah, so this was I'll date myself, back in the early 90s, and I'm from the West Coast. Crew was more of an East Coast thing at that time, so there would be, if you were a recruited athlete, you're probably from the East Coast, but I was a West Coast kid, just sort of a jack of all trades kind of generalist athlete, and and I got recruited when I was on campus because I was a lightweight. There's heavyweights and lightweights, and so they kind of said, you look like you might be able to pull an oar, So I went out.
Just like walking down campus, you're like, you look like
pretty
you
much,
do this.
pretty much.
Hey, you want to give this a whirl?
That's right. They have a table, and they're out there. They're enthusiastic. And you're like, yeah, I could try that. So I did, and competed, and made the team and rode, and it was a great experience.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I learned something new with every single one of these. So I struggled with this. I actually struggled with this one because I'm like, man, Summer Olympics. First, I had to look at what's all in the category of Summer Olympics too now, because they add and remove and things like that. So I was torn because BMX biking. It was between BMX biking, free climbing, which also was right there, and then mountain biking. I'm like, between those three, I don't know which I would go with. And the other side to that was, if somebody thought, why are you big into that? Did you used to do that? My answer would be, well, no, actually, I have no idea how to BMX bike. I could probably ride a mountain bike, but I think I would kill myself if I went down a mountain on it, actually. And then free climbing, not experienced, but they both just seem like really, really cool. And so if I was good enough to compete in the Olympics for it, that's, if you could just like wave a magic wand and suddenly be an Olympic athlete, I think those would be it. Although martial arts, that was a contender as well, because if you could just be that person that Jason Bourne's it, somebody puts their hand on your shoulder. Next thing you know, you broke their arm and threw them across the room. That actually wouldn't be too bad either.
So I think for our audience here, Christopher, we're getting some insights into one another's personality. Like I'm getting a clear read on like high adrenaline, like throw me into the deep end of the pool from Christopher, and from Sam, it's more like, slog away, like grind away at the pain through, we're getting some insights here. Maybe I'm drawing the right inferences.
And I agree. And that's the thing, right? I would have so much fun in that. Although now I know a little bit more about you and actually your background, which also tells me a little bit. I still am just picturing you walking down, going to grab lunch, and suddenly you're just, hey, well, you want to come be on the rowing team? You look like a lightweight. I don't know if I don't know if I'd be offended or if I'd be really excited. Like, I don't know what that means.
So yeah, a lightweight boat, the way they do it is the boat has to average 150 pounds, and you got 8 rowers and you got your coxswain. And that's why you want to have a small coxswain, because they weigh less, which means your rowers can be a little bit bigger, in this case, guys. And I'll tell you, like I'm like just under 6 feet. I'm not like a tall guy. I'm sort of average size. So in high school, when you're playing basketball and stuff, you're kind of medium size. But when you get to the lightweight, like you're a big guy, and that's kind of fun to be the big guy. Once
be
once
the
you're
big guy on the lightweight side. All right,
that's right. Yeah,
right.
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway, yeah.
So I know so much more about you now. So so like I said, you've been on the show before, so other people might know a little bit about Intrepid or things like that. We won't spend a ton of time on this, but for anybody who may this be the first time they've seen it, this is the first time they've heard from you, the first time they've heard of Intrepid. How describe it for folks easily so they can say, oh, okay, at least I now understand you're coming from this tech company called Intrepid, and we'll connect the dots into what that has to do with hybrid design as we get into it. But let's start there.
Totally. Yeah. No, thanks, Christopher. So we're a collaborative learning platform. And really what the core experience is, you have a cohort of learners, a team of learners traveling through a learning experience over time. So that could be a series of days, could be weeks, could be months, but you have that experience of team-based learning. And as you go through it, you are really working to apply concepts that you're learning about to your work. So it could be something related to a plan you're developing, anything, applying skills directly to your work, which of course is the point of workplace learning, all learning, arguably. And then you have opportunities to connect socially with others, get feedback, discussion forums, and so on. And then you're through that experience, obviously you have access to content, to videos and documents and so on. So think of it as, we're probably the audience is familiar with applications like Coursera or Udacity, or those kind of learning over time in the academic sense. Just think of it as that learning model applied to solving a business challenge in the workplace.
Okay. Got it. So and I think the way I had framed this up, I think the first time I was introduced to you was, I'm trying to remember how we made the introduction, but in some ways I look at Intrepid as almost a way to package up a learning experience into almost a digital boot camp, if you will, with a bit of a combination of, you can take the different elements, whether they're live, whether they're asynchronous, and you can bundle them together into a seamless experience that can then be placed wherever you need it to be. So it's not, I think sometimes I've heard people say, oh, is Intrepid an LXP? And I would say, no, that's not the purpose of it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the LXP, as it's come to be known in the category, is is for better or for worse, it's an aggregator of learning experience. It's your front door to learning in the enterprise. It helps you get to the learning you need in a thoughtful, well curated kind of way, and it gets you to learn. But it's rarely the learning experience itself, which is a little bit ironic because it's called a learning experience platform. So you get you to the learning, and we're all about the learning, like
Yeah,
whatever
the
front door
actual,
you need.
well, that's where the learning experience piece actually does kind of fit Intrepid, because it is actually where you're experiencing, where you're going through the learning experience itself, which,
Right.
But yes, we're getting into market categories, which, as if the industry isn't confused enough already.
Right.
With the one there. I saw a post yesterday about digital content development as a new category. I'm like, here we go again. It's going to be confusing. Anyway, so we won't go down that path, or we'll get lost in here all day long. But so let's connect the dots, because as we said, when we think about Intrepid, it is the destination, if you will, for where people are going through this experience. But as I was mentioning, and you brought up, it's an opportunity to actually pull that experience together into something holistic so that you can do this, which is what gets us to this whole point of hybrid design. Hybrid design, which to me, I said this before we went live, it's the new responsive. It's where we say, well, it doesn't matter if you're in person or if you're remote, we're just bringing this together, which is deeply tied to this whole remote workforce thing that's been going on, which ties to COVID, which ties to all sorts of industry activity that's been happening right now. So let's actually talk about this a little bit, because we're coming up on 18 months that we've been in this weird twilight zone of a world, and organizations have had to rapidly shift into this. Their employees were all in the office, or they thought they had people around, but for the most part, many organizations had this model. Suddenly they weren't. And I'm just curious, I have to imagine, having a digital learning experience platform. You've probably seen organizations go through a lot of transitions. So I'm curious, what are some of the learnings you've seen through osmosis with your clients that people have been going through on this?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, we, like everybody else, we were just reacting in the beginning. Frankly, we tried to make our platform available to healthcare organizations, that needed it at the time. But what we saw, I think whatever the world saw, of course, was not just us, was a massive shift to virtual classroom delivery using Zoom, using Teams. That was Q2 of last year, no question. I think that was great as an emergency response to training. And the goal, of course, is not high fidelity learning experience. The goal there is speed. Like, let's get this stuff that was in the classroom and get it online as quickly as we can. Learning experience be damned, right? because
and in many cases it was. I've experienced some of them, and they were damned. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just saw tons of CLOs on LinkedIn and stuff saying, I got my entire portfolio flipped in a week. And okay, great. Like, awesome. Like, so you uploaded some PowerPoint files. Awesome. That's great. I'm not quite sure what that meant, actually, from a virtual delivery perspective. But anyway, that was the measure at the time, was speed.
Yeah.
And look, if the pandemic had lasted a couple months, great, we're done, right? That's all we needed at the time. But unfortunately, here we are. So it started to occur to people that learners weren't going to put up with multi-day Zoom sessions, right? And that there must be a better way to do this. And so it was really like kind of Q3, Q4 last year, we started to get just tons of inquiries from current customers, from new customers saying, look, is there a better way to do this? What's the highest, best use of a synchronous learning moment? And so that really opened up people's eyes. I think in short, people just got a lot more sophisticated and a much better understanding, because they jumped into the deep end of the pool about having the right blend. What's the right blend to achieve the objective? And that's really, I think, what we've all have learned.
Okay. Well, it was interesting because, I was in a bit of a different position when the whole thing hit, because this whole hybrid thing, being the digital guy, I guess, that was just always at the core of things. So I remember when all this hit, kind of looking around going, what's everybody freaking out about? You weren't quite here yet, and
Totally.
realizing that much of the workforce wasn't. And what actually created a new opportunity for us was to be able to actually say, this wasn't even just a learning experience thing. We were seeing this on the workforce side. I mean, meetings, business events, things like that, where people were going, oh my word, what do we do at this point? Because we have no idea how to work in this environment. And so we weren't fixing our stuff because our stuff already was hybrid. But now we were actually coaching and helping other people in the organization say, hey, you took your 2-day work offsite. And like you said, you took all the PowerPoint decks, you shoved them into Zoom, and you taped people's eyes open for 2 days. And then you went, wow, that was a terrible experience. That might work for a couple weeks, but I don't think we can do this for the rest of time.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think where we're at now is this reimagine, rethinking, going deeper. And I think it's awesome. And you've heard all kinds of different quotes about, like organizations advance digitally in a few months that they would have taken 10 years, whatever. I mean, Satya Nadella, choose your guru, right? So, but that really is, I think, what we have experienced. And like you, Christopher, we had a similar experience. Like we didn't change our product, like the context changed around us, and the relevancy just kind of went through the roof, because for us, it wasn't just about digital delivery. There's tons of digital delivery platforms out there. We are addressing through collaboration what is missing when people aren't together. So it's not just digital delivery. It's recreating collaboration in this previously remote world, and now in the hybrid world. And it's super exciting to be helping and be serving and be of use at this time.
Yeah. Well, and I think that gets to a good point now on this. Let's define what we mean by hybrid, because what we talked about was the chaos that what people went through 16, 15 months ago or whatever, when suddenly all of a sudden everybody was remote and everybody panicked and went, oh my goodness. And they shifted and they threw everything digital. You saw towards the end of last year, beginning of this year, people started going, okay, this is going a little bit longer than we thought. This whole just chuck everything digitally isn't going to work. You started to see this emergence of, okay, I think we need to rethink things. What was interesting about that, though, is they started rethinking things for how do we do this purely digital. And now we're going back through this next transition, which is things are starting to open back up again. Some are going back. Some are saying, I'm never going back. Some are saying, well, I'll be right in between. And now we're stuck in this conundrum for many going, oh, rats. Now what do we do? Because we may never get back to we mentioned this, I think, before we went live, the fact that at least when everybody was virtual, you knew everybody was virtual. So you could plan and account for that. You could say, this is what we're going to do. Now you're going into things and going, okay, well, Sam might be virtual. Christopher will definitely be virtual. Betty might be in the office. We might have all these different people in all different locations, and this is creating a new set of challenges for folks. So I'm curious with this one, what are you seeing in this space as we move into this hybrid world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just.
Well, actually, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Here's a question for you then.
Sure.
Because the one big debate I see about this hybrid thing is it going to stick? Is it going to stick? So I'm curious your take on that one.
From a work perspective, absolutely. I mean, I just don't see how you shove the genie back in the bottle. Because
the toothpaste has been squeezed out of the tube.
Yeah. I mean, maybe your kids have tried to do that, Christopher, but like, it's tough to. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, we've gone through. This isn't just the pandemic isn't just a health transformation. It's a cultural, societal transformation that affects much bigger than the workforce. But this has changed patterns, habits, expectations, the way we live. And so the workforce, choose your study, whether it's like Microsoft's research on the topic, which is phenomenal. it's like, yeah, like 70% of people saying, yeah, I've tasted this flexibility and that works for me. Like, I want that.
Yep.
And organizations, if they care about people's mental health, their well-being, if they want to be, I mean, more mercenary, if they just want to be competitive in the talent market, they should care about that. So I don't see that going back. Now, what introduces complexity is hybrid is this continuum. It could be from, hey, we're going to give you 1 day a week at home, or we're going to give you, I've heard one organization say, we're going to give you a bank of days per year to be hybrid or be remote.
Really? I haven't heard that one. These new flavors keep coming out. The new flavors of hybrid keep it. Well, it's every other Tuesday and Thursday. I've seen it all over, but I hadn't heard you get a bank of remote days in addition to your sick bank.
Like our bank of PTO we were talking about. It's like it's bizarre. But anyway, I mean, the highly prescriptive, okay, to, hey, this is totally personalized, and here's some targets, like, Microsoft saying 50-50, but work it out with your manager. I'm paraphrasing massively, but like, there's this huge continuum, and this personalization, like you were talking about, Christopher. It could be at the individual. It's at the individual, the team, the organization, the region. There's so many factors there. So I do think it's going to stick. I think it's going to be. We're going to iterate massively on this over time. The honest executives are saying we're going to figure it out as we go. But the concept is, I don't think it's going back. It'll just be a permanent feature of work.
Okay. Well, so I very much am in the same camp as you. In fact, I've been advocating for this for many, many years, that personalization is really the key behind. I shared an article yesterday about this because I'd read it, and the headline read something about how to have these difficult conversations about returning to work. I clicked on it half expecting it to be one of these, how do you strong arm or gaslight your employees into thinking that this is really what they want when they're saying, I don't. But it wasn't. It was about this whole concept of moving forward. If you're going to do what's best, which is really to say, hey, let's figure out what works for the role, for the individual, for the time of what we're doing right now. And then let's figure out what makes sense in that situation. The challenge with that is it comes with a lot of difficult conversation. It comes with a lot of problem solving. It comes with a lot of different things. Even what we're talking about today, hybrid design, in terms of, well, okay, so how are we going to account for the fact that some people might be here on some days, some won't be here ever? How do we actually do that? And Katie brought up an interesting point, add to the complexity here. You've got the fact now, when you move to this hybrid model, you've got time zones that you're dealing with, which we had before, but now even greater than we did before, because some organizations were pretty localized with their workforce, and now that's being distributed. So I personally don't think it's going anywhere, and I don't think it should. I think I've seen some organizations try and put the toothpaste back in the tube, and I just predict they are going to see real quickly that, one, it doesn't fit, and two, people are just going to leave in droves.
Yeah, and I think some first principles are really important here too. It's like, what are we solving for with our hybrid work? I don't want to say policy, philosophy, culture. I mean, because I think there's this sense of like you said, oh, let's just get back to the office. Okay, to do what? And let's be clear on that. Are we solving for face-to-face spontaneous interactions that drive innovation? That's an important part of our company. Is it to solve for relationships and culture, the glue that keeps people together? Is it teamwork? Is it you've got a lot of early career people who need coaching and mentoring and some face-to-face because they're just kind of lost otherwise. What is it that we're solving for? And if we can be clear on that and have a statement of, a problem statement, a values statement, it should really emanate from the company's values. Then we're kind of able to start cooking with some gas, because if you're just kind of flailing about saying, oh, we just need people in the office once or twice a week, well, okay, what? People are going to ask the question, why? For what?
Yeah. Right. So, and I think, and it gets back to the point where, it's going to be a personal conversation and a situational type of a thing, because again,
Yeah.
there is no universal answer to that. Even if you're saying, well, collaboration or innovation or whatever that is,
Yep.
well, we got to figure out, does that make sense for everybody? Does it make sense for some? Does it make sense for, how does that work? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Go for it. Go for it.
No,
Because I interrupted you, which I always warn people that I'm going to. But what were you going to say?
That's it. No, I was just sort of thinking about the challenges we inherit at this time, that as a result of being remote, and the things we have to kind of solve for. I mean, some of the things we need to solve for. We're kind of there's this digital overload, this exhaust that we're all feeling. Yes. All the data is showing people are spending way more times on platforms like Zoom and Teams, and that's well covered. But things like meetings are running longer. People are on chat more. They're on chat more after hours. There's no the clear line between work and home.
Lines have been blurred.
Obviously, just blown up. And so, I mean, some of the things that are concerning to me, and going back to like Microsoft's research, because they're able to look at massive data sets, are that communication has narrowed to much more within teams. Like they're seeing evidence of siloing, and that is actually carrying over when people go back face to face. The communications are not as broad. I'm not talking to Christopher outside of my network as much as I used to and should be. And so those are things that have long-term implications and concerns for innovation and the kinds of things I think actually that learning can help. I think we can thoughtfully design to if we know those things are challenges, we can begin to solve for some of those things.
Well, and that's going to get into, as we transition into some of the conversation around actually what are some of the challenges we face on an L&D side. But I think your point about that is spot on, because a lot of times what I've seen, so let's take communication as an example, in this siloed communication. I've seen way too many times over the years people say, well, there are just certain things that have to be done this way. And then when you go back to this, but what is it that you're talking about? There's just something about it. What is it? When you can actually unpack what that is, then you can actually start to solve for it in different ways. Because to the example of, well, you're finding people are more siloed in their communications now. Well, if we can know what actually drives them to have cross-functional communication, we can start to say, okay, then how can we create and foster that in this new environment, instead of just saying, well, it doesn't work, so let's throw in the towel and go back to where we were before.
Yeah. If we know it's a kind of a general condition, then let's design for it. Let's design for, collaboration that can happen across teams. Let's design cohorts that can come together. Let's be thoughtful about that. Absolutely, there are solutions there.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about this from a learning and development standpoint, because this is what you just hit on, to me, is at the very core of what has to happen if you're thinking about this hybrid design when it comes to L&D, which is, and when I say hybrid, and this is an example, I did a team offsite all day last Friday. And one of the core principles we had on this is we are not going to tell anyone where they have to be for it. They want to come in, they can. If they don't, and it has to work. It has to work seamlessly across the board. And it worked pretty well. But going back to how did we pull that off is something that you just hit on, was we were intentional about what are we trying to achieve in each of these components. And now let's back into how do we design to achieve that goal. So I'm curious, as you've seen organizations have to start think about this, especially with Intrepid. I'm familiar with Intrepid and have used it. How are you seeing organizations step through that? Because it can be way too easy to just throw what you have into a nice little organized pathway and then say, I just feel like it's not working very well.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there. I mean, there's so many examples. I'm thinking of, one organization through the pandemic that had to shift its whole model. So they had a manager development program, and
Okay.
it was all kind of designed around bringing people physically together. These are like high potentials, and it was like that was the core design, was like all around the physical connection. And so they had, I mean, pandemic hits, and they had to immediately rethink, and start to pull people together in a cohort so they could connect and learn together over time, and then replace that with some synchronous learning, where they could have some live connections. And so they were able to, on the fly, be able to reframe how they were doing that, to the point where they were actually, the pandemic almost gave permission with the learners to try new things, because there's just there's a, before it may have been thought like, oh well, I really want to go to this, I want to fly into Orlando or Las Vegas or wherever because it's this reward and it's this thing, like,
Yeah.
I don't know,
It was an incentive.
there's an incentive. There's a mentality of that. But let's be honest, when that fades over time, and what was the impact of that? Did it have, what did you remember from it? That was nice, whatever. Maybe I played the slots a few times. But
brought my golf clubs.
Brought my golf clubs.
Got away from the kids for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, okay. But what this organization found was that the persistence of learning over time, the connections made, the shared work that happened was real and kept showing up in their evaluations, to the point where,
okay,
when they compared the results and the impact of and the feedback from before versus after, the after one was superior to the previous experience.
It's funny you mention that example, because I had a similar one. I don't remember when it was, but we had a similar program. It was delivered in person. It was a couple days, and there was a lot of resistance to touching it. It was a bit of a sacred cow in the organization in terms of, well, don't, people love it, and we get a lot of great feedback, and there's a lot of collaboration that's happening. And when we actually dug into it, some of the things popped up that you said, well, okay, I mean, people like it, they're enjoying it, but is that actually tying to successful outcomes, or is it just a feel good? Which, if that's the goal, going back to, if the outcome is, hey, we want to have people just feel, we don't really care whether it does anything, well, then that's a different conversation to have than saying, no, this is a program designed to develop the skill. And anyway, the way we actually walked the business back from this is, we architected two. We knew it needed to be updated, but we walked the business through two examples, and they walked through, redesign this in-person 3-day, whatever, how you think it should be. And they did. And then in parallel, we sat and laid out, but what if we could do this? And we did our ideal map, and we had framed it up as, this will be the second class alternative for the people who can't attend the 3-day in person. We'll do this hybrid program that, it's not quite as good, but it'll be fine. And when we laid this thing out and showed, well, these multiple touch points and what we could do to drive collaboration, what we could do to measure progress along the way, we got to the end of this thing, and the response was, well, could we make that one the first choice? And it's like, yes, because the reality is, when you do this right, you actually can design a superior product that actually will drive greater outcomes. But again, it goes back to designing it right. If you just stuff everything from here over here, it doesn't have the same effect.
Yeah, and if we think about to the values of the hybrid workplace that employees and workforce is looking for, and they want flexibility, right? That's what they want. And so if we can design learning that is, to use the phrase semi-synchronous, happening, you're connected with a cohort over a period of time, but you're fitting it into your schedule. You're participating in the experience, still connecting with people in discussion forums and group work and so on, and schedule those live connections when it makes sense for you, I mean, then we're really tying into a core value that we know employees are looking for. And we're able to begin to address some of that thoughtful, if we design well, that digital exhaust. Like, don't throw people into, multi-hour Zoom sessions. Be really judicious. Ask yourself, like, what is the value of the synchronous moment? Is it to just deliver content because I feel good as a facilitator about talking at people? I mean, I had this conversation with one of our partners, Christopher, and before the pandemic, I just don't think he got it. He just was like, yeah. No, sure. But it's really important for me to deliver my content. And I was like, okay, can you just try it? Just try to record yourself. We'll kind of, and I'll bet you anything, we can boil this down, to some short nuggets to deliver your wisdom, your sage expertise. And then when we bring people together for these synchronous moments, they've all consumed the content and they're doing higher order learning. They're bringing problems. They're saying, hey, Bob, I'm not his real name. I'm having this objection come up when I apply your sales training model. Like, that's real. And he's like, oh my God, this is the way it turns me from,
it moves you from a trainer to a facilitator is really what it does.
And a higher order coaching and just
higher order coach. Yeah. A facilitator and a coach. And I think that's, one of the things that when I've been in discussions about how do you do the most of, whether you call it blended learning, hybrid learning, virtual, whatever.
Yep.
It's really about saying, if we're going to pull people together for anything synchronous, we better be rock solid on what is it we want them to get out of that. And it better not be to tell them something, because there are 1,000,001 better ways to tell people something than pulling them together live and say, I expect you to block your schedule, move your stuff and whatever, just so that I can give you something. And that's again, you have to address some of the kind of underlying preconceptions that you have to let go of. Like, well, do I really add value by delivering this? I mean, maybe I do, but is the live component of me delivering this really all that important? And it was interesting. I did a survey this week and got, I don't know, 700 responses to it about the fact that, hey, how do people feel about live content being presented or pre-recorded content being presented as live? And it opened a whole bunch of dialogue, but at the core of it, that was the key message that came from everybody that you saw in this was, if you're going to ask me to do something and it has to be at a predetermined point in time, that has to have there has to be something tangible I'm getting out of that for it to be worth my time. If I'm going to block my time, if you're going to say you can only come do this from here to here, there has to be something to do it. And we can do better, to your point. We can do better than the low order learning. We can do higher order stuff, and then people will find value in it.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of maybe we'll come out of this with some kind of some guidelines or some principles, some values. But if we think of the workforce is looking for maximum flexibility and they're suffering from digital exhaust, then to your point, Christopher, you better be damn sure that you're not violating the flexibility that the workforce is so clearly looking for, or adding to the digital exhaust. And then on the other frame is just from an operational perspective. The more live sessions and live moments you've got, the more complex that is to schedule.
Yes.
And over time zones, like Katie said, hi Katie, Katie's your neighbor, by the way. You guys should meet sometime. The more you're challenged with scale and complexity, and then that'll get us to some of the other hybrid issues to unpack.
Well, and Jerry brought this point up, and I think this is, oops, that's not the right one. Jerry brought this point up, which is when we're doing synchronous things, and this is just a rule of thumb that I've implemented over the years, which is if we're pulling people together for synchronous stuff, we are not delivering content. That cannot be the medium by which we deliver content. Yep. And when we have them, to Jerry's point, this is when we should be addressing application of this. We should be discussing these things, talking through the barriers to application, solving some of these problems, because that's what really the synchronous time is most valuable for, is to say, well, you got people together, you can work dynamically, you can think critically, be doing that during that time, not sitting being a vegetable, consuming something on the back end.
Totally. And I think we're having the right conversation here too, Christopher, because, there's another myth that I see come up over and over again, which talks about, what's better for live versus digital. And it has nothing, it pivots around the axis of the content type. And it's like, well, okay, we can do technical and like the skill building stuff online. If you want to learn about coding or some kind of technical skill, that's fine. But if it's a power skill, you better do that in person. You got to shove people all together in person. No, I mean, it's the same concept of we can. We talked about this a year ago when we got together. Can you do collaborative learning around communication skills?
Oh, I've heard it so many times. You just can't do that online.
It's such a myth, and it doesn't mean there aren't great ways to practice those kinds of skills in person, but the same concepts apply here too, which is we can get exposed to new ideas, we can practice on our own, and then we do this higher order connection either via ILT, live synchronous, or in person. It's not content specific.
Well, and I think, going back to this as guiding principles for folks who may be thinking about, how do I get into this new world? Because a lot of what we're talking about can quickly translate to, okay, so we want to do things more digitally. Great. Step one, strip content out of anything you're doing live. I mean, that is just a easy step one. If it's live, and the one thing before I'll go to step two that I will hear a lot of times, well, but what if people don't go through it? What if they don't go through the content and then they come to the live thing? My answer to that is fantastic. Some of the best conversations that we've had where we've done collaborative brainstorming is when somebody didn't do the content and they fall flat on their face because they don't really have the context and quickly realize, I don't have what I need to be effective here. But guess what happens? The teams start to work together and help each other out. And that person quickly realizes, hey, I have some gaps, and they go back and do that. So I think sometimes this fear of, well, but they might not get everything. It's like, that's okay. There's no guarantee they're going to get everything because you have them live either. They might be tuning out and missing it at the same time there.
Yeah, and what I hear behind that too is maybe is the facilitator's fear that they're not in control, that they're not controlling whether someone has received the content or whether they haven't delivered it. Maybe we should open like a psychology practice for recovering trainers, Christopher.
I mean, but
what is your need for control?
Well, but the thing is, you have to deal with it. You really do have to deal with this. And on an empathetic level, you have to, because I remember the days of being a trainer, and you do get very personally attached to your stuff. And the thought of saying, well, you're just going to record me once and make a video, like, what's my value then at this point if I can be replaced by a video? And I learned personally, but then I've also had to coach people on my teams over the years to say, your value is not in your ability to deliver content. Your value is knowing that content and being able to facilitate dialogue, facilitate discussion, know how to get people to the outcomes that you're driving to. That's where your real value is. So why not strip out the time you waste talking and actually then let you do what you can do best and what you're uniquely skilled to do, which is facilitate. That's actually, in my opinion, an elevated position. Because if all you're doing is delivering content, I mean, I can get somebody else who can deliver content and they might even be more interesting to listen to. But if you're a master of your craft, know the content, know how to facilitate this discussion, now we can address that fear, that pain point of, well, what's my relevance in this new world? And the answer is it's a greater relevance if you do it right.
Yeah, and the answer also is, you have the opportunity, greater relevance, because there's also the question of scale. I mean, going back to that sales training example, which I mentioned earlier, where one of our partners was kind of struggling with this shift to being, going from delivering lectures to video and focusing more on coaching. There was a huge logistical challenge, which was they had several hundred, over 1,000 people they need to reach. So his first model was like, okay, I need how many sessions? 20 people per session, different time zones. I need to schedule all this stuff. And I'm like, no, that you're thinking about it the wrong way. Let's reimagine this as an asynchronous experience or semi-synchronous, scheduled over time. And yes, you will have to do some scheduled sessions, but they're just going to be these coaching sessions and fewer.
They're smaller, they're more bite-sized. Again, from a scalability standpoint, to address some of the problems that people have commented leading up to this of, well, what about time zones? What about, complexity of different audiences? Well, if you're taking it from a 3-day thing into these bite-sized 90-minute sprint sessions where you're digging deep and actually tackling and chewing through problems, well, now you can do that, and you can do that from a command center. I remember way back in the day, we set up a command center where we could have facilitators literally shifting to different audiences throughout the day, which, by the way, is way less fatiguing on a facilitator than standing and delivering for 3 days straight. To say, you know what, I can bounce to multiple sessions each day, but I'm in more of an active facilitation role than standing talking the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one that reminds me, something popped into my head there, Christopher, when you said that, is one of the major leadership development firms out there really shifted its business model through the pandemic to be less focused on contractors who were flying around to different clients and dropping in and doing their facilitation, to a more centralized delivery model, combining some semi-sync with synchronous sessions. So you've got a smaller team, higher quality control, lower cost, to be frank, for this organization. So there's a way to really improve the business model of delivery as well.
Yeah. And again, I think what I've been able to show from the data standpoint is you're delivering a better result. So going back to this fear of, will the organization still see my relevance? Will there still be a place for me? The answer to that is absolutely. In fact, it may be an even, well, not maybe, it will be an even more critical place that you'll hold than before. So with that, though, I think as we shift to, so that's, again, that's step one. Like, take the content out, because now you've addressed a huge part of the hybrid design challenge, regardless of whether people are in the office or not, which is, hey, you consume the content portion of this when it works for you. Fit it into your schedule. Going back to this whole philosophy around personalization, which is, here's what you need. You figure out when it fits. But then this live piece, there's challenges you've got to deal with this. And it's a question that comes up a lot for folks that I see is, okay, well, what do you do when there's some people are there, some people aren't? Do you have 2 different sessions? And I'm curious, I've got a perspective on this, but I'm just curious what you're seeing from a client standpoint. Are you seeing people break them apart and kind of run? Going to your point, we can scale this now, because now facilitators, instead of being stuck in 3 days, hey, they can run from a command center. Are you seeing people go more towards this? They're splitting it up and saying, some of these cohorts we run the synchronous activities virtual, and then we do in-person ones, or are they mixing them?
Yeah, I mean, so far, and I think this will change over time, we're seeing more of the virtual sync still. I expect, as we emerge, more and more from the remote world to the true hybrid world, that we'll see good arguments and good reasons to have those be live, face-to-face kind of interactions, and that it's going to be driven by a whole range of criteria around the nature of the application, where people are co-located, where and it gets down to that personalization of hybrid. Can you pull together? Can you assume that people are going to be accessible at a certain time? Maybe it's tied to another company event that's bringing people together live, like a sales kickoff or something like that, where you can assume you've got some good reason to assume people are going to be together. But I think that where you can't, that's going to, I think, drive more towards the virtual facilitation, and that's where the complexity comes in. One thing too around this, I was kind of shocked to see, as we think about kind of first principles of delivering to a hybrid workforce. We may all assume that in the remote world, everybody has what they need in terms of cameras and a good setup and so on. And I mean, I was shocked. Microsoft data showed that almost half people said they're not set up. So I know that's not L&D's responsibility. It's not.
Well, we have to account for it.
We have to account for it. You have to account
for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. No, it's we a lot of times make a lot of assumptions, and I've seen this when in global organizations where not necessarily even just hardware, we make a lot of assumptions about even just internet access and capabilities that are not necessarily as prevalent in other parts of the world that they are in the US or the UK and things like that. But going back to this design piece, one of the things that I kind of have a cautionary tale to folks as they go back to, as things start opening up, there is this pull to say, oh, great, now we can have all these things and they can be synchronous in-person events because we'll all be back in the office because we know people will be there. And one of the things I remember a time where we were dealing with some of this stuff with onboarding, and I suggested that we actually design for hybrid to say, wherever we do anything in person, there should be a virtual component happening at the same time. It should be happening at the same time. And I remember they looked at me like I had 8 heads because they just said, well, I mean, but why? We know people are there. And you just start thinking of examples. Well, what happens when somebody's sick and can't make it? What happens when, life hits and somebody's not there, or somebody chooses to come in sick because they are like, well, I don't want to miss it, and this is the only option that I have. And I said, we now are making this non-inclusive for anybody who happens to not be able to be there. And with technology, it quickly becomes so easy to do it both at the same time that you say, I don't think you actually have to separate the two. You can design once and deliver in 2 ways. But to your point, you have to account for some of these things, because even last Friday, I've been doing this for years. And even last Friday, there were moments where we went, shoot, we probably should have had a 360 camera that was set up in the middle of the room, and we didn't have one. We thought we could maybe position laptops in and work. It didn't work very well. We probably should have this. We probably should do this, little tweaks like that. But it can be done for anybody watching or listening who's like, well, you got to design them separately. I would say you don't.
Yeah. And Microsoft's research, I keep referencing this. You go to their site and look at their latest research on hybrid work. They make a very similar point, Christopher, and have some great mock-ups and pictures of the way things could be set up. So, and I think you and I, when we were talking a few weeks ago, you talked about Google,
their campfire, their campfire rooms.
Yeah, I mean, just in this principle that, like, whether you're virtual or in person, it should be the same. It should be, well, it's not gonna be the same exactly, but it should be accessible, fully accessible, fully thought through, not sort of like this hack. We've all been in those, been on the wrong side of the phone trying to participate in a group call, and you can't hear anyone, and it's I think our empathy levels have been raised by this. We're all kind of connecting remotely, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's a really good thing that's come out of this.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to, again, I can say from firsthand experience, it can be done. And I think that's one of the myths you almost have to bust with hybrid learning is that, well, you can't really mix the two. It's either in person or virtual. And the answer to that is that's not true. You actually can do it really well. But going back to the thing we said from the very beginning, you have to design with intentionality. And there's just little things that over the years we've found along the way that work really. One example from last Friday. I didn't go in person, I was virtual. So I facilitated the virtual component so that it didn't feel like, well, the people on the phone, they're kind of the second class participants. They're kind of there, but nobody's really paying attention to them. Nobody's really working with them. They're kind of listening from the wall. It's like, well, no, you got to account for if you're doing something hybrid, you should have a hybrid facilitator facilitating with you and your in-person one there so that you can have this blended experience that feels seamless across the board. So I think there's just some of these little things that can dramatically improve the user experience.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
So have you seen any, just as we kind of conclude here, because we're running out of time, even though I feel like we've only scratched the surface on this one, but are there any ones that I'm just curious, things going in, I could sit and think of a million things where people have said that just can't be done, blah. And I'm like, when we get to the core, you can. But I'm curious if there's any ones, you mentioned the leadership one, but over the last, however many months, have there been any programs that you've seen with clients, some of those aha moments where they've said, I just don't know that we can do it this way, that now on the other end, the one example you gave, they're like, it's actually better. This is better than it was. Are there any other ones?
Yeah. The audience that has the most resistance that I've found are the professional trainers. And it gets back to kind of, it's real thinkings of like real fundamental questions like, well, if I'm not in this role, what am I going to do? And a lot of those are around these human power skills, communication skills, presentation skills, facilitation skills. Every one of those we have found ways to innovate and improve, and because people get real opportunities for practice, which you honestly have a hard time, many times you have a hard time doing live. Like you can't have a difficult
that's always the thing that's always the thing that gets pinched. I mean, literally, I've been doing this for my entire career. That's always the thing that gets pinched in those sessions. Oh, we're running a little behind schedule, so we're going to cut into the role play. We're going to cut into that piece because we got to get through this content.
Yeah, and let's be honest, a role play is by definition it's contrived. Like it's not real. Like
right.
you're not really practicing in the real environment. So anyway, I mean that's what we've seen, but again, I think the beauty of this last gift, the silver lining of this last period of time, is that it's opened people up to consider new possibilities. I don't know. One of the areas that I think is a content area that I think we're going to need to we do need to think on as a result of the hybrid environment are manager skills.
Yes, I 100% agree.
Because managers, they need a different, they need some new tools in their toolkit to be effective virtual managers.
Yeah, it's baseline. The skills are similar or the same, but it's a brand new application of it. It's a brand new application that is a muscle that has not been worked. And I'm 100% with you on that. So, we could have had a whole discussion just on that topic, but let's pause there because otherwise we'll go way over. So I think kind of if I were to recap some of this, I think one of the things we just said out of the gate, even before you start, is you've got to shift your mindset. Because if you're coming into this that we can't, or what I'm too held tight to what we were or what my role is, you're never going to get anywhere because you're going to always be trying to design and preserve that. So you kind of have to let go of that before you even start.
Yeah.
Then we can say, strip anything content delivery out of anything live, because if you don't do that, then you're already fighting an uphill battle that's impossible. Yeah. And then at that point, you can start to say during that live time, what are the most impactful things we can do? And we can do that both in a hybrid or virtual and in-person world seamlessly. I mean, it seems to me like we've got a pretty straight playbook there, Sam. I think we did well.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean,
I hope so. What do I know?
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, and you said this when we were talking a few weeks ago too, Christopher, that people, maybe their mindsets have been a little fixed or ossified with this, that they're thinking like, okay, yeah, through the pandemic, I realized like everything's digital. Like I'm going all async now.
Yep.
Okay. Or, we're opening up. I'm going all live now. And,
yep.
and so we need to kind of hold, thinking about a new concept of a digital blend. Blended learning's been with us forever. We just have some new tools, some new context to design for, but the most powerful solutions are likely going to be some kind of a digital blend concept.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you on that. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining me again. It was great to have you back. Great topic. Hopefully everybody watching got something out of this. Have a wonderful rest of your Thursday and a great rest of your week. Thanks, Sam.
You too, Christopher. Great to be on. Always a pleasure. Take care.